Welcome back to the channel Russia in Context. I'm Wyatt, and today, once again, we are inside. That just has to do with the fact that there is more news from Russia that you might have missed. Now, we're going to start today's news segment with some stories connected to food, things that people living in Russia might actually notice in their day-to-day lives. First up is news about KFC here in Russia, where its name is slowly being changed to Rosticks. Now, while this may not sound like news because similar rebrandings have already happened to other famous Western chains, such as McDonald's becoming Вкусно и Точка, for people who were living in Russia from the fall of the Soviet Union up until the early 2010s, the return of Rosticks is kind of a big deal. The reason for that is because KFC actually just bought into a pre-existing company, Rosticks, in the 2000s when it was looking to move into the Russian market, and eventually Rosticks were just rebranded into KFCs. As far as I understand, some Rosticks continued to exist further out in various cities around the country, but for the most part they became KFCs. For those that remember, this is maybe seen as return to form, maybe even a welcome one at that, as the franchise Rosticks was actually one of Russia's most successful back in the day. I mean, I'm still not going to eat there, but I do sincerely hope that they bring back the cannibalistic chicken imagery. Top grade stuff. Vodka sales increased by nearly 6% last year, and sweetened wines rocketed up by 150%. Now, before we make any needless associations with difficult times and Russians using the bottle as a tried and true method of escapism, we must take into consideration the fact that most of this growth is attributed to a decrease in bootlegging operations. At this point, though, we can pose the question of why illegal liquor manufacturing and distribution is so widespread in Russia. Russian dairy producers are beginning to sell milk by the kilogram, most likely to hide the volume of liquid actually being less due to price increases in raw materials. I can't wait for this trend to continue so I can go to a restaurant and order 450 grams of beer along with 750 cubic centimeters of steak. Moving along, the ski resorts around Sochi, where the 2014 Winter Olympics were held, have had an abnormally warm winter. To help with this dire situation, they invited a group of Siberian shamans to come and do a special ritual to bring snowfall sooner. It's incredible what people will do to ignore the effects of climate change, isn't it? Now, let's turn to Russian politics. This week, the Russian government decided to become a bit more like their counterparts in Washington, D.C. They no longer have to publish information regarding their property or their income. Not that it's difficult for people to hide that information via legal loopholes. Anyway, how about we start demanding the opposite of this? Government transparency everywhere. Naive, I know. Sorry. Let's just continue. Nearly a year after Russia launched the largest European conflict since the end of World War II, and it would appear that they're still not clear the motivations or goals. Vyacheslav Volodin, head of the State Duma, recently stated that the special military operation has become one of liberation for the citizens of Ukraine and Slavic lands from American colonizers. A soundbite that will surely play well with Russia's soft power ventures in Africa and South America. More so, at any rate, than demilitarization and denazification, impossible to define goals that were touted in the beginning and have gradually fallen out of favor. The partial mobilization was supposedly finished back in early November, when Putin declared the process finished. However, the presidential decree was not rescinded, so some people still question as to whether or not the mobilization process is ongoing. A local politician from the Pskov Oblast sent a letter to the administration asking them to issue a declaration, which would formally end the mobilization process. The response told him that the president's decree of partial mobilization is still in effect. This was brought up recently at a press conference, and to address the issue, Putin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, stated that we should orient ourselves based on what the president has said. So, case closed. Mobilization's finished, right? Well, a week later, the State Duma was still discussing laws that would protect certain groups of people from being called up for partial mobilization. They're also talking about how IT specialists shouldn't be exempt from mobilization, but should instead be utilized for cyber warfare. Now, maybe it's just me, but it's sure strange that a country's legislative branch would be so worried about passing laws protecting certain groups of individuals from mobilization, or better utilizing those it has mobilized, if the process was totally finished and there wasn't a new round lurking on the horizon. We turn our focus now to the situation around transport across this gargantuan country. At the end of January, people freaked out when it was announced that the government was going to require people to make reservations to cross the border by car. The Duma jumped to quickly explain that the new law is only going to affect large trucks hauling goods. However, looking through the available documentation on the Duma's website, the terms they use basically are just vehicle, which would theoretically include passenger cars and the like. People will definitely be keeping an eye on this affair. That said, Estonia has a system like this, and I remember how quickly we got through their checkpoint without waiting in line, only to be stopped on the Russian side for multiple hours. Introducing a system like this would actually make the border crossing much more pleasant. And if the government is actually trying to do something positive, it's rather unfortunately timed. Regardless of whether or not people will have difficulties crossing the Russian border by car remains to be seen, but it certainly won't be any quicker for them to reach it. The government has made numerous cuts to budgets concerning the development of highways in the country, with many projects being delayed for the next few years or even indefinitely. I must note that a few projects did get budget increases, but nothing crazy. The general takeaway is that Moscow doesn't see the need to invest in regional roadways unless there's interest from a large company. This ignores the likelihood that people don't want to invest in areas that lack developed transportation infrastructure. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because, unlike Europe and the States, in most situations when driving in Russia, there's only one realistic route to take in any given compass direction. This can be a nightmare if there's an accident, or the road narrows, leading to traffic, or the road can be in poor condition due to elevated levels of wear and tear. Regardless, sometimes it can be just disastrous. These new roads that are being temporarily shelved would do much to alleviate these issues and even perhaps promote intra-regional growth. For example, the southwestern Horda is a project that is being shifted to the back burner in the current economic quagmire. This project would connect Yekaterinburg along the Volga from Samara to Volgograd before ending in Krasnodar, taking a drive which is currently 33 hours in the best conditions and reducing it to 22. This would be done by connecting and upgrading existing two-lane roads into the equivalent of an interstate system. Another such project would likewise reduce the travel time from the Belarusian border to the Kazakh border by 33%, from 27 to 18 hours. Although perhaps this won't be the main issue connected to why these roads aren't getting built, a recent report, though, suggests that a sizable percentage of road construction vehicles here in Russia are from unfriendly countries, and that in the coming years, there may be a deficit in needed machinery for building highways and maintaining such infrastructure. As usual, there's talk of parallel imports through Kazakhstan or replacing Western machinery with Chinese equivalents, but there are various bureaucratic hurdles which have yet to be sidelined. But what about the transport infrastructure when it comes to economic needs? The talk of Russia reorienting its economy toward China is all well and good and somewhat feasible, but it ignores certain key issues, one of which is becoming more and more apparent: transport infrastructure. At the end of January, companies shipping oil and petroleum products eastward began to notice increased delays in unloading trains. This can be attributed to a growing reliance on Russian railways to export more product to Asia, to help balance the deficit from a decrease in European sales. It also comes amid traffic in eastern ports like Vladivostok, where difficulties due to China removing its COVID restrictions led to a surge in cases of illness. While it's possible that more efficient methods of loading and unloading in docks and rail yards will in part alleviate the situation, the fact that Russia's rail and port infrastructure was oriented largely westward means that such problems will continue for the foreseeable future. Medvedev made another round of insulting and inflammatory comments, but I could easily make entire episodes around these telegram tirades of his. Instead, I have to give Rogozin his moment in the sun. Dmitry Rogozin, former head of Roscosmos, the Russian equivalent to NASA, and current head of a volunteer combat unit called the Tsar's Wolves, that's not a joke, that 5th grade level of branding is all his doing, has come out of the hospital after being shelled at his birthday party in Donetsk. Yes, I realize that sounds like a Mad Lib, but I promise it's true. Anyway, evidently it was his turn to make a bunch of sound bites, and while there's a lot of gold there, I have to focus on his most incredible claim. A war robot, BattleBot, codenamed Marker. Honestly, after Tsar's Wolves, I expected a bit more of a name for a killing machine, but oh well. So, Marker can operate independently, detecting targets at a distance of 15 kilometers or more, then decide which target is the priority. Well, according to Rogozin at any rate. Coincidentally, the creator of Marker is a member of the Tsar's Wolves, and the group will be responsible for testing the device in Ukrainian war zones. If all goes well, they will recommend that the government write a fat check for a whole bunch of markers. This is in no way shady. Not at all. Before moving on, though, I do just want to recall the last Russian robot that was so proudly shared across Russian media. It was at the Army 2022 Expo early last summer, and the robot bore a striking resemblance to a little robo-dog from AliExpress. Following up on a story from last time, where I mentioned that over 100 inmates had been pardoned after serving a 6-month contract with the Wagner Mercenary Group, it would appear that it might not be all that legal, as the grounds for pardons are either a blanket amnesty for all criminals of a specific type or a presidential pardon, which would have to be done on a case-by-case basis and requires the expected bureaucratic documentation of anything connected to the correctional system. A request must be written to the president, which is given from the penal colony to the regional correctional offices to the Russian Federation's Commission of Pardons, which then gives it to the governor of the region, who would then finally pass it along to Putin. The last time anyone was pardoned in Russia was 2019, when Putin signed the documents freeing 3 individuals. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how this new process is being undertaken in order to see so many prisoners released from serving out the rest of their terms in such large groups. Wait a minute, never mind. It seems that Dmitry Peskov, while assuring journalists that the process was totally by the books, also mentioned that presidential decrees regarding pardons are put together and signed in confidentiality. So we'll just have to take their word for it. And it seems that Prigozhin, the founder of the Wagner Mercenary Group, has asked the state Duma to make it a crime to publicly criticize any military volunteers, including former inmates. I guess it's as good as time as any to make it totally clear that in the last news video, I was not at all being sarcastic about being thrilled at the prospect of potentially unreformed felons returning from active warfare to cities across the country. Not sarcastic, not in the least. I'll end today with stories about animals. But before anyone gets their hopes up too high, the first involves multiple deaths. On that note, in the Omsk Oblast, a security guard struck a Bactrian camel at least once and continued to harass the animal before it turned, knocked the man to the ground, and stepped on him. The man died from the trauma, and the camel was later shot. Don't worry, we're not going to close up on that note. Out on Kamchatka, a ranger at the Kranotsky Nature Reserve spotted a family of 5 lynx that had approached his cabin. He managed to capture a few seconds of them on video before they scampered off into the snowy forest. And with that, once again, you are all caught up on Russian news that you may have missed. The links to all these news stories will be in the description below. If you liked the video, hit the like button, share it with your friends, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, And be sure to leave comments and questions down below, and I will respond to them as soon as I can. Once again, I'm Wyatt. The channel is Russia in Context. Thanks for watching.